Hello, and welcome to the Further Podcast, where we explore the far reaches of the human experience, from missions to Mars, to skydiving, to blowing one's mind with psychoactive substances. These conversations offer insight into how these extreme experiences showcase the human spirit, and just might teach us how to live our everyday lives a bit better. I'm your host, Haley Maria Duran, and I study the effects of psychedelics and other out-there experiences on people's minds and brains. So in this episode, I interview Dr. Carli Domenico, who I know from IPN, so the Intercollegiate Psychedelics Network, and I've heard about her doing some really fascinating research with LSD using in vivo electrophysiology, but Carli is also a bit of a pseudo-astronaut, I suppose you could say. She recently participated in what's called the Human Exploration Research Analog Study. So this is something that NASA does, where basically people are put into a very small container, and it is a simulated mission to Mars, where they're in there for 45 days, and they're given various experimental tasks to do. And, it's all about figuring out, as Carli describes, the human element of how we're going to get to Mars. How are people going to get along? Are people going to have like psychological breakdowns and whatnot? And, what can we do to have people being as well as possible in such confined quarters? So it's really quite interesting. She did conduct some interesting experiments while participating in the HERA project, but she wasn't allowed to get too much into the science of what happened. But I think just hearing about her experience itself, being in this little small space for 45 days, and it's quite interesting. So if you've ever wondered about what it would be like to go to Mars, I think this might be an interesting episode to listen to. All right. So could you tell us a bit about this Human Exploration Research Analog campaign? It sounds quite interesting.
It's been a campaign that's been going on at NASA since at least 2015, maybe I think 2014. Even possibly before that. And it's basically this simulated mission to Mars that NASA has employed, in which they select 4 crew members and they put them in this isolation environment where they are constantly watched with cameras to be able to see like different things in human factors and human behavior and teamwork. And these 4 people are confined as they undergo the simulated mission. It's a 600 square foot habitat. And you basically work together for that time. It started off as a 7-day mission, worked up to 15-day, to 30-day, and then I just completed the 45-day mission. So this campaign in 2024 is a 45-day mission. And you basically undergo like 2 weeks of pre-training with your team after 2 years of being evaluated. So it took me about 2 years to get to the point of being in the habitat. And then 2 weeks of pre-training, and where you learn the different science that you're doing in the habitat, and then 45 days in, and then about 2 weeks after as well, in which you're doing post-data collection. You've been released to the world, and they have these nice comparisons of data, within and outside of the habitat.
Wow, I had read a bit about HERA before, but I didn't really realize how intense of a process it was to get involved. 2 years of prep work, it sounds like, and a very intense experience as well. 45 days, 4 people that have just been sort of not selected randomly, but that you don't have prior familiarity with, minus those 2 weeks, it sounds like. What made you decide to do this crazy thing?
Yeah, for me, it was a lot of ways a bigger than bucket list experience. I've always wanted to be an astronaut myself, and a lot of astronauts have this as a primary experience, in their resume, essentially, because it really gives you this understanding of what a mission is like, what being on a timeline is like, what being confined is like. And on top of that, it's if you can do these challenging things, in my opinion, without microgravity, without the cool, visuals of Earth, then you definitely like should be cut out in a lot of ways to be an astronaut. So I'm like, it can only get more interesting from here, essentially. And I had worked at NASA in 2014 and 2015, and I was in the behavioral health and performance division human research program. And at that time, I was kind of studying HERA. So people were in there at the time, and I was looking at habitability measures and environmental enrichment and things like that, seeing, how can cognition be preserved? How can plants like help people in the workplace feel better and thus in confinement? And so as soon as I saw that, I was like, when I get my PhD, when I to be like PhD 30 and like really healthy, basically, as like the primary exclusionary criteria. And so as soon as I met those, that's when I applied essentially and just started doing like different health tests and interviews until I got there.
What a process. Started 10 years ago with your NASA work, it sounds like. What were you studying at NASA?
So at that time, yeah, I was primarily studying sleep and cognition. And yeah, behavioral health and performance, it's all different psychology countermeasures for going to Mars. So it's a lot of like the human factor element. So again, there's like stuff like habitability, like even just things like where are tables placed, like how is that affecting mood, like based on the layout of the environment. I did a little bit of stuff with that, but most of my work was in actigraphy devices. So like actowatches, astronauts always are wearing these actowatches on the space station, as well as like even in pre-training, as well as in the HERA. And those are, evaluating things from like heart rate variability for stress, to lighting. So it measures like lumens, as well as, and then that's all being correlated as well with your sleep. And then I was trying to evaluate what's the best actowatch and the best algorithm for sleep compared to polysomnography. So I would have like some astronauts that had PSG, doing like EEG, looking at the actual brain waves to compare how good is the watch and motion detection essentially and heart rate compared to that, and like what's the best we can do, which as you can imagine isn't always the best. It's usually like 85% accuracy or so. But yeah, so my work was doing that, and I was using the same actowatch that I was studying like 10 years later, which was interesting. I'm sure it's been refined, but like yeah, it looked a lot very similar.
Wow, long process. So I understand that your PhD focused more on studying psychedelics. How did that sort of fit into, wanting to go on a simulated mission to Mars and NASA research? Like, to me, in a lot of ways, those seem somewhat disparate, but also it's like, both very out there experiences.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so, early on working with NASA, that was one avenue and one route I was really interested in. I would say I've always been pulled in the two directions of aerospace and psychedelics, which in a lot of ways are like different frontiers. Like I consider them both a final frontier of sorts, between like the mind expansion of psychedelics and things like that, and obviously outer space and space exploration. And a lot of the stuff that I did in PhD, I was doing electrophysiology, which is a combination of engineering and neuroscience, and like the analysis that was associated with that and experimental design really set me up well, for the HERA, as well as like potentially for any other like astronaut-like position, because it's a lot of just being versatile in the science. It's a lot of like, you need to do repairs that are engineering based, you need to troubleshoot, you need critical thinking. Those are all, things that happen in PhD. And in most, at least as far as I'm sure, at least most sciences, it seems like. And then on top of that, having the knowledge of the cognition stuff, because so many of the experiments in the HERA are cognition based. Most of what they're studying and interested in is like your emotional fortitude, how your coping mechanisms, your communication and team chemistry. And a lot of it's like, how does the team work together and like create this flow state that like is like optimal problem solving, and then keeping people well, and that's like from sleep and stress perspectives. So it really gave me a lot of foresight for like how to do the science right, and like to give the rest of the crewmates like kind of insights of like how to make sure we're answering maybe certain surveys correctly, or like certain performing things, and giving feedback in the right way essentially.
Yeah, it's interesting because I suppose a lot of people, when they think of, NASA and studying space, they're like, there's a lot of physics and engineering and all of this sort of stuff. But the human element of it is a huge component. And I noticed while reading over the NASA website that it just said like the HERA mission specifically wanted like people from very like diverse backgrounds to be thrown together. What was that like for you?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, Johnson Space Center specifically is like the human element because like most of the other bases like Goddard, JPL, everything, those are a lot very engineering focused. Um, and yeah, Hera's all about that human element because that's the most fragile thing about Mars right now. Like we have stuff on Mars, we have rovers, we have helicopters, we have payloads, whatever, but we just got to get the person there. And so that's where this mission especially was focused on cultural diversity. So in the past, it's really been like I think psychological diversity and things like that. And this time it was, we're going to have a crew that goes to Mars from different countries. And so we had a crew member from Iran, we have one from India, and then another was from the US, like me. And not only that, but then they also wanted to see like different dynamics, maybe like in, religious background, political background, those kind of things. They wanted to have these like foundational aspects that were culturally different, maybe our communication styles. But then they also found different things team chemistry wise that were really set us up for success. So like open communication, agreeability, things like that, I think were really fundamental, as well as like we all thought differently, but we all were motivated and like motivators, I guess. So yeah, it was fascinating because we would like try to like learn each other's languages and like learn our backgrounds and like hear about like I don't know anything from food to like stories of some of the crew members when they came to the US and stuff like that. It really created like a bonding experience. And I think we capitalized on it, whereas it could have been a barrier with other people. So yeah, I think NASA like they're doing an amazing job at like testing the team chemistry element. And this was like a really successful example of that. I think sometimes they could pick crews that maybe unpredictably, like went downhill, but ours was really, really strong.
Wow, that's inspiring to hear because a lot of times, like, I just think in the current like state of like the US, like people can really get sort of defensive of various viewpoints and then can't really communicate. But it sounds like despite like these very different backgrounds, everybody was able to communicate really well, which is inspiring. What do you think that came down to? Was it personality traits? Was it like the training you did before? Like what lessons or can we learn from that, I
Yeah.
suppose?
That's a great question. I think that, you do like a lot of psych evals, and I do think that they wanted to make sure they picked people that communicated and were motivated. Um, but I also think I'm trying to remember what I like had a specific thing that we kind of all had in common with respect to like why we wanted to share, I guess. Yeah, I guess everyone was just like open, everyone wanted to succeed, and that was really foundational. And then you had also asked like what was it, I guess, that made us despite our differences. Yeah, so we had there were even times like 45 days like you're going to have really tough conversations, you're going to like step on eggshells, and from the get-go we set the like intention that well, like the understanding that we all had good intentions. Like at first we were stepping on eggshells. At first it was like kindness, but in the sense of like you didn't want to piss somebody off kind of thing. And over time it became this development of like we became siblings because we confronted every one of those moments and we opened up from the get-go of like we're going to, if we step on each other's toes or something, we're going to talk about it. And by the end, like we never had conflict essentially. Like it was very odd. Like it was very rare to have conflict after we had these initial talks. And we all had this again, I think most critically, this understanding that no one is intentionally or has bad intentions. Like no one's trying to undermine you. No one's trying to harm you. Like everyone is there to support one another. And I think that was something that NASA like really probably looked for. At least it felt like that.
That's interesting because, like, I would think my gut impression would just be like, oh, if you're living with a bunch of people and it's chaotic, that chaos could like spiral and get worse over time. But it sounds like you actually, the whole team was able to learn how to be together more. So, like, an interesting thing I heard about is like the whole project basically was trying to simulate an actual mission to Mars as like close as possible. How did they go about doing that?
Yeah. So, there's confinement, there's like launch, there's tasks that you're doing from like you're doing habitat repair, spacewalks, training for spacewalks, and then you're doing the science, which is like what you do on station. It's what we'd be doing there on the moon, whatever. Like you're taking up different and flying different science for people to test, like what goes on in microgravity, what happens to the human, those kind of things. So that we were on a constant schedule. Every moment of our day, we had to click start, stop kind of thing. Yeah, like whether it's hygiene, whether it's exercise, everything you're doing is that's just the same way is on space station. So it's like everything for the astronaut is you feel like a kid because you have no choice really, but it also like makes it super like set out in like it makes you, because you don't have that choice, you're so clear-headed. Like everything, it was the most focused and clear-headed I've ever been in my entire life, and like at peace in this odd way, even though it was this like high stress environment and they tried to make it really stressful, because of like the way that things flowed and because of the lack of simulation. It was just like very, very clear-headed. But and then on top of that, so 8 hours a day, just like on space station, you can't be in your bunks. Basically, you can't sleep except for from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. That's the only time you can be in your bed. So you try to do that kind of situation. And the other biggest, I think, element that was really similar to that is like we have mission control, and so you're talking to mission control all the time. All the call outs are the same. You get to talk to your family only once a week for 30 minutes, essentially. You have a psychologist that supports you and a doctor. And then most of all, though, you have a communication delay. So on the mission to Mars, essentially, the farther away you get from Earth, the longer the duration it takes for time, like of messages, essentially, whether that's to your family or to mission control. So they wanted to see like what happens. We need our astronauts to be more autonomous. Like if an emergency happens, if they're dealing with something, if something breaks, like eventually there's a 10-minute time gap. So 10 minutes for us to get our question to mission control, 10 minutes for them to respond. And then you have to factor in like actually solving the problems. So, mission control would have to like look up the answers and things like that. And so incrementally throughout the mission, day to day, it goes from 0-second delay to 3-second, 5-second, maybe 1-minute delay, 5-minute delay, there and back. And so throughout the mission, like that increased just as we were going to Mars, as when we get to Mars, and then when we return, it decreases. So that was a very cool aspect, and that was, I think, that's one of the huger questions that they're really trying to find an answer is like how to make astronauts more autonomous and how do they deal with these things and how does it impact also their relationships with each other and with mission control.
Wow, it's really interesting the way that you describe how like you had kind of a lack of control in your schedule, but in that you found a lot of like freedom and focus and clarity. To me, that almost parallels like sort of my experiences going to like mindfulness meditation retreats where it's like you have that schedule, like this is what you're doing. Exactly. And through that, like you just get into a state. And that's interesting that despite, doing science all day and simulated repairs and whatnot, that, with this like just one-pointedness with your work, it sounds like you were able to get into that state.
Exactly. I had a friend in parallel, like that was at a retreat during it, and like we were talking about it and debriefing, and it was like we had so many of the same types of experience despite being in completely different environments. Yeah, and it was absolutely that clarity. I even meditated quite a bit because like during most of my white space, or like if I got like fuzzy in the head, like I would meditate. And I had not felt such peace and like you said, clarity and focus, even like since meditation retreat. That's like the last time I've had something like that. And that's another place where I don't have a phone, right? Like I don't have access to internet. I don't have access to choices. So I really find that that's like one of those really healing and unique experiences that I recommend. Like I feel like if any human can attain it, it's as you know,
going to Mars.
Yeah, or like meditation retreat, like digital detox. It's fascinating what it can do, and just like realizing, because we are evaluating our emotions all the time in there. And I have to like be limited in how I say that, I guess. But it was fascinating that I could pinpoint any time something rose in me. So like as soon as like irritability, or as soon as like anxiety or happiness, like just randomly like would just felt so potent, and it felt so I could easily identify the trigger. I always could tell because of how still it was in there. I could tell the stimulus and I could sort it out. And since being out, it's interesting because I notice how much more chaotic emotions are and how busy the environment is and how hard it is to pinpoint where it all came from, because next thing you know, you have 3 other emotions stacked on and you haven't dealt with the first one, So that's been something that's been just like vividly different coming back out.
But it sounds like perhaps some of like that extra sort of mindful state stayed with you a bit afterwards, or?
I think it's especially I had intentions getting out and I still have them, but I think a lot of it's just having that comparison, like the fact that I know what it was like and got to experience like 45 days of that is like, and then the abruptness of coming back to reality and default world has left me more aware of it, but I'm still trying to figure out how to cope with it, certainly. And so like examples I give like that I found really interesting was when we first got out of the hab and like went to a hotel as four crewmates, like we were trying to figure out where we were going to go for dinner. And like the concierge of the hotel was like talking to a stranger, and we literally could not have a conversation because that conversation that was like 20 feet away was happening, and we were just so overstimulated, you know. And just seeing that like difference in attention and like overstimulation, and realizing that like we are constantly under so much stimulation, and seeing that like unravel, being out of there. And then the other thing that like keeps coming up to me was like I remember like 2 or 3 weeks after being out, and I was driving. I've been driving and like been interacting with the world, and it was the first time though in months that I had that moment where you react and you're like, God, like you like get mad at somebody. And I was like, whoa, like my baseline irritability is back to where it was before I got in the hab. And I realized that a lot of this irritability is because of these like unaddressed emotions and like decisions that I like feel like I haven't dealt with or addressed. And because I feel like I haven't done everything that I want to sort in my day, I like have irritability. I don't know. And like that had been gone and I didn't realize until it returned. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things of like the absence is what's making me more and more aware. And that's why like just like a meditation retreat, I find like these things are so healing and like important and like just good to get you out of that box that you're in, that you're not even aware you're in, you know? Like I was in a box, but I feel like I'm actually more in a box out here sometimes.
Whoa!
So, yeah.
Oh man, man.
There's more constraints, but more decisions. But yeah, I don't know.
That's fascinating. Again, that reminds me of just meditation again, because I've heard like Buddhist monks say like they're more free in the monastery than the actual world.
Yeah.
So
I feel that. I understand what that could mean a little bit. I don't know.
That's wild. While you were in there, what were like some experiences that stand out that were especially like impactful?
Yeah. I have to like be careful without saying like science, I guess, at times. Yeah. But you know, there were just some really like amazing bonding experiences with the crew. Especially the emotional communication, I think, was amazing. Seeing that I could like overcome these types of, I don't know, difficult, challenging conversations with them made me feel really capable outside of that. I guess okay. So one oddly, one of our exercise things was that we have to, and I'm allowed to talk about the bike. We had to bike and we had 3 days of biking and 3 days of like resistance exercise. And on the bike, it was just so unbelievably brutal. Like it's as like intense at biking you can do it basically, without giving details, for like 40 minutes. And you also can't have any stimulation during it at all. So you're like looking at a wall essentially. And for me, like this mental journey of overcoming the bike was honestly like it was a journey. Like it was so transformative. Even just that, it always felt like it was this micro parallel of the hab, because it was like every minute was passing. Like in the hab, you're like every day is mission day 1, mission day 2, and you're repeating it over and over again. You're writing it in your surveys, you're writing it on the science you're doing. Like every day you're just like looping mission day 2, mission day 2, mission day 13, 13, 13. And it felt like that was the bike, and I just had to keep doing it over and over again of like minute 1, like is it minute 30 yet? Nope, it's minute 3. You know what I mean? Like that kind of pain. And I'm just not a biker as well, and that kind of like mental what did my crewmate called it, like the pain box, I think, or something like that. And she's like, I just go to my pain box. And yeah, anyway, so I found that was really, really impactful for me. I journaled like multiple times a day, which really helped me reflect on these types of things. And then it was the other like impactful things, I guess, that come to mind amorphously and acutely are just those like flow states that would happen with the crew. So like seeing at the beginning how jagged we were at times, we would like, you're supposed to monitor each other as astronauts and as crewmates, but you're supposed to monitor in a way that you trust each other, but you're just there to like pick up and like catch the ball if it falls kind of thing. But like not in a monitoring as in like you don't trust the person and you're like making sure they're doing the thing right or something. It's hard to distinguish, but you can really feel it when you're doing the tasks and when you're performing together. And so like as we got closer and closer and we had like bonding tasks and things like that, as well as just we danced a lot. Like our crew was huge into music, and so I think that was like a fundamental thing too of like why things were so good. We danced so much. We had like dance parties, and I taught them to shuffle and things like that. And so like as the thing went down, like I just can't tell you how unbelievably smooth like problem solving got together. And we would like we had spacewalks where we have to wear we wear like virtual reality headsets, and there's like 2 drones that operate and they monitor the people in the VRs. I'm one of the VR people as we maneuver on Mars and stuff. And so different events can happen out there. You have to like repair things. You have to like do the science. And the way that that started and like how jagged is like the only word I can think of just like this, that, and to just like this absolute flow mechanical situation, like all working in a system, and seeing that unfold and like our communication unfold and just how fun it became, was really, really neat. Yeah, so I think those are some of the fundamental experiences. And again, also like the dance parties, we would like jerry rig things to have like lights, like fun lights. And,
What?
yeah, like and have like dangle, like we had like red flashlights, so we would like dangle these red flashlights and like hit them so that they would like dangle off the ceiling. And like we had really interesting food. It was like dehydrated food a lot of times and stuff, and we would try to like make cakes out of it. Like we had Kodiak cakes, and so we would like put it all together, and then like we got Nutella like every 11 days, and it's like a little snack pack. So we like a roommate made a cake with Nutella, and anyway, you just like you find these things to make creative, happy moments happen, because and like novelty, because otherwise there's no novelty. There's you're like in the same 600 square feet. You have the lights that you turn on and off every day. Like nothing changes. If a pen drops, everyone's like, you know what I mean? Like it's absolutely wild how like how consistent everything is. So yeah, just those types of moments were beautiful.
Wow. There is so much there. It's funny. Like I'm just thinking about how like I read like everything was like so scheduled and whatnot. Were the dance parties scheduled?
They were not, but the white space was at times. So
oh, okay,
yeah,
so that's what the white space.
Yeah, white space is like the free time. So we'd be like, okay, like that this night. I can't remember what we tried to plan. Like we had Valentine's Day was a dance party. Yeah, and then we were like day 30. I think we just made a dance party just because we wanted to. But yeah, we were like we need something, and then we moved. I think we moved it down to 28 because we were like I need it sooner. But yeah, it was.
And what were the, I guess, pseudo-astronauts listening to? What were these dance parties?
Yeah. Oh man, it was everything, but it was a lot of like the dance parties were electronic music. Like I would often play like the house and some bass, and another one would do like another crewmate would do like a lot of big room. And I would say like it was interesting to me because not for the dance parties, but for like for the mornings, because we always have music playing whenever we could. But like everyone on the crew was a Swiftie, and I'm not a Swiftie. Like I don't not like Taylor Swift. I'm just not a Swiftie. I just like don't know music that much. And so like there were days like I had to be like, can we not do Taylor Swift today? It's because everybody else like we went through every album multiple times. So like I'm so familiar with her music now. But yeah, another crewmate like loved Coldplay. There was just like but I even like did a salsa day, like Beatles. We had a Beatles day. We had it was good stuff.
And yet you weren't allowed to listen to music while on the pain machine.
And we had to turn it off. So like if somebody's on the bike, because you're always doing things like all around each other. Like one person doing the science experience while they're next to the bike, and if someone's doing the bike, like you can't have music on. Which we had headphones, but it was just so brutal because you would like get on and you'd hear them like turn the music off. And you'd be like, no, I like wish you forgot. Yeah.
Wow, that is very intensive. I guess like. It's interesting because I don't think I'll ever be in a place where I'm going on a simulated mission to Mars, but like just hearing this, I'm like, maybe I should not be on my phone as much. Maybe I should try to like, create that less simulating environment, but also try to find more like ways to have random bits of novelty.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like it's beautiful and like insane. Like I was reflecting a lot on it when I was in there, like in my journal. How unbound the mind gets. So it's like when you remove certain stimuli, the brain can really just like do things. And so I noticed in there, and it was so strange too because my crewmate did too, and she had brought it up, and I was like, I literally just journaled about this like yesterday, like how we were both experiencing the same thing without, like priming each other essentially. But it was, for example, like I don't remember what I'd be doing, but it would be something like a song or like I'd be doing a task. I would feel like a texture of something, and my brain would just go to this nostalgic memory of childhood that I did not even know I had anymore. These are memories that like, I have never gained access to. I thought were completely gone, and I experienced them in vivid detail. And if I stopped and I probed them, I could go deeper into the memory, and like I would like the time lapse of that entire memory would just keep unplaying and playing and playing, and it would I keep like tethering to other like childhood memories that I didn't even like remember at all. Like, and these are beautiful memories. Like these weren't even like often right like in this like I often like probe I guess with a counselor or something trying to find like difficult memories or things like that. And this was just like something tapped in, and because my brain had nothing else to distract it with, and because it didn't have anything else it was worried about or thinking about, it was just free to go like associate. It was free to do I saw it as like pattern completion essentially. Like it took a pattern, a certain stimuli, and it completed it in this something that I thought was deep and suppressed or gone. And that happened many, many times. And I would just journal about it. And then I found out my crewmate was having the same things happening. And we were just like, how can we have this and like access these things? Because like I want my brain to remember these things.
It's so interesting because to me, it sounds a lot like what people might describe during psychedelic assisted therapy, having like spontaneous, really deep memories emerge, often of like childhood or whatnot, and then that being like related to music. So it's interesting to me that like such a different stimuli could evoke like maybe a somewhat similar mental state in some ways.
Yeah, and I think it's like something about that. Yeah, like maybe yeah. I was gonna say like it's the lack of stimulation in this case, but like I guess the lack of distraction or the lack of like maybe like the ego mind, like the egoic mind, because you're not like constantly thinking about the future, and you're not constantly worrying, or like deciding something or planning. And I feel like maybe in psychedelic cases, people also, like, are kind of released from the planning aspect. I don't imagine people like plan too much, in those states, but are rather more present and like, yeah, I don't know.
It just all sounds like a very, like, even the like difficult parts sound like they were just amazing and really impactful in a positive way. Were there any aspects of it that still like stick out to you as like not fine besides the bike?
I mean, it got really restless at the end, I would say, like the last week or two. Maybe, and we couldn't tell if it was because of the day. We couldn't tell if it was like, is it because it's been 30 days or is it because we're approaching the end, of like, I wanted to run through a wall. Like, you had not run, or like, you couldn't walk more than like 10 feet, 10 steps in a row, essentially. And just like that feeling of like, I just want to like sprint through something was really different. I remember like just doing this a lot more, like messing with hands, like our legs were tapping. It was just a lot more restlessness from the confinement. I think that was difficult. And yeah, I think at the beginning, missing like family and missing like my dog, things like that were pretty hard. But our communication was really, really helpful, like getting emails and stuff like that. We got like those emails once a week, which is really nice. Whenever it was the communication was really high, because otherwise it was a 30-minute call. And then we also, I believe I can talk about like, there were times when we were really exhausted, mental exhaustion and things like that. And I thought that was going to be really hard, like, and really unbearable, and we were going to fight. And what was fascinating was that those were like some of the most bonding times for us. So yeah, I thought like in retrospect, when people asked how challenging like stuff was, that it was going to be really based on like the stressors that they gave us, and it really just like built our friendships and like build our bonding, and that wasn't even the harder parts, I think. Yeah, I slept better than I've ever slept in my entire life. Thought it was gonna be really hard to sleep. We could all see each other while we slept in this like four-way like square kind of thing, and the moment my head hit the pillow, I fell asleep, and I slept all night. And I literally like I've never done that in my entire life. And I think it was just that like sense of like clarity and peace, and lack of like concern. I knew what was happening the next day. I knew like what my schedule was, and I knew I was just gonna do everything as it was laid out. And that's something that I'm like trying to take away in this like here too, is because like I think if I have like a timeline like that, I can now see how, you know, sequentially like on it you can be, versus if you just like give yourself the choice, you get swallowed by it sometimes. But yeah.
Wow. It just sounds like a mind-blowing experience in so many ways. If somebody wanted to like get involved with like this sort of project, I guess, like what steps do they do to like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The next camp or next mission is actually just started this week, I believe. So 4 new crewmates just went in. And this should be going on for a while. There's a lot of analogs. So another one is called Chapea. They're actually, I think, right now recruiting people. CHAPEA. Don't remember what that one stands for. That's like kind of a food study. It's actually a year long. Really, really refined Mars simulated mission. And they were like our neighbors, quote unquote. They were actually like in our building in their habitat, which is fascinating. They're on another part of Mars, but we like would send like a message to them every once in a while. Anyway, so for these analogs that exist, it's generally required. You're astronaut like. I can't remember for TP if it's 30 as well, but it's definitely like you got to be fairly healthy, also like mentally healthy as well. Like they don't want to risk you being in confinement and like breaking down. Like they wouldn't put an astronaut in a space capsule for a year as well if that weren't like going to be safe for you essentially. So they just want to make sure people are safe. And then generally it's military, pilots, and other post-grad education. So like one of our crewmates was a PA, another was PhD, another had several masters and was in military. I can't remember which qualifications are like the bar, but I want to say probably it's just like masters. Might be I think you're more you're more likely to get it if you have a PhD, if you're not military, that kind of thing. And then that's what I think I was going to say earlier. You'd asked along the lines of like, how did, was it so successful or whatever? And it's kind of an obvious answer, but it's really teamwork. Like the reason why we got along so well, the reason I think the number one priority thing that they look for is how do they operate on a team? Are they leaders? They want leadership experience, but not as an individual. A lot of military people like do awesome things and awesome work, like in Rangers, for example. Actually, I don't know if I was talking based from my crewmates experience, but a lot of that's like you got to beat the self. A lot of that training and a lot of that like getting qualified is like you have to beat your own mind kind of thing. And like if you can do that, then you got this kind of thing. I'm not saying that they are not also teamwork people, but you have to. That's like the fundamental aspect. Whereas for crews, they want teamwork. And they want people that can work well as a team. And so I think demonstrating that and having leadership skills that show that are really fundamental. For that and astronaut candidacy. It's interesting. I've heard things about how like if during interviews, there's like been an astronaut interview with this guy who's just so unbelievably qualified, and apparently like he has talked all about himself. Like they like have this like round table interview, and he's like talking all about his accomplishments and like the things he's done and amazing things. And at the end they like asked him and they're like, oh, like it says here like you have a family, and he like had not mentioned his family the entire interview, and that was like what apparently excluded him from being an astronaut, was because like he did not like even acknowledge this other part of his life or like the support system that they are, right, and like the way that works and things like that. So yeah, it's a weird anecdote, but it's just something to keep in mind. Of like, they don't want necessarily like the person that can just wants to do it all on their own. They want somebody that understands like the support they need, knows how to ask for help, and can help.
Interesting. I didn't really think about like the whole team element before. Like I don't know how, because it seems like it's so essential, but it sounds like some of the most meaningful moments were like the flow state with a team, and that's being able to work well with teams is how you get selected over other technical people. So, wow, it's interesting.
Yeah. And I was just really thankful that everybody that we got along so well.
Anything else about your experience that just stands out as interesting?
I'm not sure. I mean, for me, I thought about it a little bit earlier, but I guess because we were talking about difficult things, I found it odd that with a lack of stimulation, it's pretty common, I suppose, but with a lack of stimulation, I ate a lot. So like my appetite was crazy. Like I was snacking, and like you're being watched on cameras at all times. And I remember like I would like have to answer like in my surveys like I'm feeling like guilt and shame because like I just know people are watching me like constantly snacking, and I never eat that much. Like I never feel appetite that much. Like I eat when I'm hungry, and I was hungry all the time. Like every time I would eat a meal and be like looking forward to the next snack. I never stopped feeding. And like, yeah, it was just very interesting to me, how the brain finds ways to get stimulated. And that was just the only way. That and music were like the main ways. So, and I had no control over it. I had no control.
I mean, you had interesting like freeze-dried food. So maybe there was like some novelty of eating that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, the really like the most fun things we would do. Sorry, this is messed up, but it's like we would trade food. So it's like everyone had a set menu, based on your caloric needs, and you would get like it would be things like dehydrated vegetables and like dehydrated fruit or whatever, like canned fish, and then like camping meals and stuff like that. You get your occasional like Nutella packet with sticks once every 11 days, like just little packaged smoothies, whatever, and most of it was healthy, and everybody had different preferences, and so we would just spend so much time every single day bartering and trading food, and that was like the excitement. That was like the most energizing and fun thing. And I would and nuts, whatever, like all this stuff. And it was funny because at first I like had all these different targets, and then like as I like was gaining weight and more weight, towards the end I was like, okay, I'm only trading for nuts, like beans and canned fish, and so that like really let down my other person because they like really wanted certain things, and then another guy like only wanted sweets and like the not junky food, but like the less like not green beans and fish. So he was like he would always give me his green beans and fish, and I would give him my like others anyway. It's great.
Well, thank you so much for all of this fascinating discussion. I had no idea just how human like space research could be. So
absolutely. Yeah, we are the fragile element, and it's interesting that NASA's got to figure out, not just the cognition, like how do we keep people like thinking well, how do we keep muscles strong in microgravity and bone density up there, but it's like how do you keep people well, healthy, mentally well, and like functioning as optimally as possible, and then especially autonomously without mission control and without Earth being so close by. So that's definitely what these missions are trying to accomplish, and I think it's going pretty well so far. It was pretty interesting.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah.